What is up, everybody? Brian Mendler back in your life on this Monday, the first day in June. And I am super excited today to be joined by my friend, Dr. Shaun Nelms. Shaun, it's good to see you. We have a lot to talk about, and you asked me right before we started, how am I doing? And to tell you the truth, I'm going to get emotional right away. I'm not doing great. I'm sad. I'm lost. I don't know what's happening in the world that I live in. And I felt this way truthfully for like 11 weeks, really since Corona started. But, the events of the past week with George Floyd have hit me hard and really not knowing how to react, honestly, and what to say and what to do, and feeling devastated at watching the video and feeling devastated at watching what's happening around our country right now. And I'm hurting is how I'm doing. How are you doing?
Yeah, I think the same thing. I think the discomfort, quite honestly, is where I think many of us are struggling. I had a call with my administrative team this morning. I'm a superintendent and professor at University of Rochester, and I had a meeting with my team this morning, and I gave them a moment to speak. I said, "So let's just talk about our own health. Like, what are we thinking about? What are we struggling with? Because we're not going to have those conversations in safe spaces. You're never going to have them." And one of the administrators said to me, I was writing my newsletter to staff this week, and I found myself struggling with what words to use so I didn't offend or I didn't incite, and I didn't know how to put my thoughts on paper. As a white woman, I know how to put my thoughts on paper. And I said to her, that's a great discomfort to have. I said, because for some, and folks like myself, that's discomfort we feel every day. How do I walk into a room without being judged? How do I respond without being a physical threat, especially when you're 6'3" and broad? How do you move in a way that doesn't reinforce a negative stereotype? How do you represent a group of individuals in a different way so that people can trust you and trust the next person who walks into a room? And so that discomfort and that struggle that we face every day, I think a lot of people in America, particularly white folks, are experiencing now. And I think it's good. I think in that moment of discomfort, we can have honest conversations. And I think that's something that would benefit us all. Devoid that, I think we will go back into our comfortable spaces and no longer have the conversations or make statements that are most meaningful and that we can learn best from.
So, I want to just kind of fill people in on how this your my podcast came to be today. So this was not scheduled. I actually, and I was wondering actually if you know Jeff McKinney. Do you know Jeff? He was
Yeah, no, John. Yeah,
you
yeah.
know Jeff. Yeah. So Jeff was supposed to be my guest today. I recorded a podcast with him. We talked a lot about his daughter Anna and their foundation, Anna's Wish. He lost a daughter to cancer, and I recorded that actually back in February, and I had been meaning to run it, but I'm trying to stay current with everything. And the plan, people are tired of talking about coronavirus and distance learning. So I was going to run Jeff's today, and then, the stuff happened this week, and I thought I need to get Shaun on here, and so I'm going to push Jeff to next week. But I basically was trying to figure out yesterday what to say, right? Like, do I say anything? I had all these feelings and emotions, and I feel the same as a white person. Like, I don't know what to say. I don't know. I don't want to fan the flames. Do I say something and risk being attacked? Do I not say anything, and is that worse? And all these things go through your mind, and that was happening for a few days. And then my wife and I were talking about the incident with George Floyd, and my son walked in the room, and he looked at me right at us both, and he said, "What are you guys talking about?" That's what he said. And in that moment, I didn't know what to say to him. I was lost, and I knew that I needed work right then, right? Like, I knew I needed work because my instinct it was to say, go back on your iPad. It's an adult conversation. That was my instinct. That was what came to my mind. That is what, and I also knew in my head I don't think the right thing to say, anyway, I texted you yesterday this long sort of message that I put out, and I want to read it. And then once I'm done reading it, I'm going to let you respond to how you responded to me, and
Mhm.
we'll talk about that. So the message I put, and I sent this to Shaun first. I just wanted to see your thoughts on this before I posted it. It said, and I posted it on Instagram and on Facebook. I learned a lot about myself yesterday. My wife and I were having a conversation about George Floyd. My 8-year-old son walked in the room and started asking questions. Truth. My instinctive reaction was to tell him we were having an adult conversation. What I learned that second is I don't know how to talk to my kids about this. I'm ignorant. I'm lost. I don't know the words. I feel sick to my stomach about the brutality my black and brown friends experience. I also do not want to teach my own children to be afraid of police. My son already struggles with anxiety. How do I respect this, but also teach him about the realities of life that minorities face every day? Today, I commit to learning, to improving, and to getting better. I commit to not being part of the problem. And then you text me back. And so what you said was so interesting. And I had so many more questions about it. So why don't you just tell everyone sort of what you wrote, what you audio messaged me back?
First, I want to tell you that I think it's amazing that you reflected enough to say, if I'm going to have a conversation with my child, I want to have a balanced one. So I want to learn more about it first instead of just shutting it down. And I think often we either put our own opinions into the minds of our kids without doing any research or any self-reflection, or we just avoid it altogether. So the fact that we're having this conversation, this dialogue, and I don't represent all Black thought, I represent my own thought and my own experiences. But the fact that you actually did it before having the conversation or before you continue the conversation is a step in the right direction. And then I said in the response, I said the issues with Black people are not with police. I think that has been overstated. All right, our issues in America are with the legal system, and unfortunately, police are the entry point into the legal system. Right. So we know that historically the court systems have disproportionately given us harsher sentences. We know that prisons are full of innocent Black men. We know that the criminal justice system has never been created to give it to be balanced and fair. I mean, that this goes back to the beginnings of our history. We all know that. White folks can't deny that either, right? You ride down your street and you see someone pulled over. The vast majority of the time, it's a person of color. And so if you just think that that's acceptable, and you've already convinced yourself that that's just a norm within that community, then you already become part of the problem because your psyche has already created that you're better than them. So what I said was our issues with the system itself, and that police officers, unfortunately, are at the position of either deciding to put someone in the criminal system or not. Many of our aunts, uncles, cousins are also law enforcement. So we don't hate the cops,
Right.
but we hate bad cops. I saw something recently. It said if there is a police department that has 1,000 great officers, law-abiding, community-oriented officers, and they have 10 rotten apples, and that 1,000 doesn't take care of those 10, doesn't report the injustice, doesn't check their situation, doesn't provide them adequate training, then you have 1,010 bad officers. And you can replace officers with anything. It could be teachers, since you're an education platform. If you had 1,000 great teachers and 10 that you know every day do their best to discredit a child, to erase their history, to not be culturally competent, then now you have 1,010 bad teachers. And so it goes on and on and on. So I guess the question becomes, when does the 1,000, the silent majority, take the time to understand what they should be doing to help our society be better? And more importantly, what should they be doing to make sure the voices that those kids hear, or those kids who interact with the bad police officer, they hear, they have to be in control of making sure that they control the narrative that for the 1,000 and not allow those 10 individuals or 10 bad people, those four murderers in Minnesota, be the ones who depict how officers across the country are being viewed. And so I honestly believe that. We deal with that all the time in education. I can tell you every year there's a teacher who does or says something that is culturally insensitive, often racist, sexist, and you see unions rally behind them, protect their jobs, and people will say that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, but they have rights. But no one's protecting the rights of the kids. I mean, again, it's a snowball effect. So if we're truly going to be a more perfect union, then it's going to take the silent majority to finally say enough's enough. And unfortunately, blacks are not the silent majority. We don't have the power. We can't weaponize our whiteness. And so I think that's something that has to happen. I think that people are becoming more aware and more conscious of that.
So if that, I'm going to ask you to put yourself in my shoes, right? And if you're me and that's, your son who comes in, what do you say? Like, what do I say in that moment? Because I think a lot of people are struggling with this like I am. In fact, I know that because when I posted it, I was just hammered with responses saying, same here, same here. I have a 6-year-old, I have a 9-year-old, I have a 12-year-old. My kid struggles with this. I'm afraid of that. And what are the words in that moment, at least an idea of the words that a parent can say to their kid to get the conversation going in the right direction?
I think it depends on the age of the kids. And I think the first thing that you say to them is, dad or mom, we're struggling with the situation that's happening right now, and we're trying to better understand it. And when we understand it, we want to have this conversation with you. For my 12-year-old son, my 13-year-old son now just had a birthday. He and my daughter who's 17 and my daughter who's 23, they all had completely different responses to this. My 13-year-old son, who I think probably wants to emulate his dad, he's like, Dad, I'm angry. I'm upset. Like, I know looting is bad, but nobody would have been talking about this on Monday had it not happened. Nothing would have been done. Nothing visceral. No, he said use the word visceral. There would have been no visceral response to this. And I'm sitting there going, that's my 13-year-old son. So for him, I listened. Just say more. Tell me what you're thinking about, Shaun. Tell me why you're feeling that way. Where are you getting your information from? And what I found out was that kid was more socially aware, more conscious. He was being consumed, looking at videos and reading articles than I ever imagined. So for him, it was listening. For my 17-year-old, who is very optimistic in nature and at times Pollyanna, said, Dad, if people just get along, things will be better. And my son said, well, people have been getting along, trying to get along for a long time, and things haven't changed. So I heard them debate, and I had to kind of help her understand what she was saying by optimism. And hers was really a place of hope. And she was saying, I'm speaking to a place of hope, not ignorance. It was a place of hope. And then my oldest, she's just older, and she's like, Dad, this is really messed up. And she sees both sides of it because she's been through high school and she's been through college. She has friends from everywhere, and she's experienced racism herself. And so I think as parents, we have to do a better job of acknowledging when we don't know something, and let our kids understand that it's okay to work through an issue that's unclear. And then we have to be better listeners. Don't try to shape their thinking. Ask questions: where they're getting the information, how they're processing that, what's the source? Because if their information is from resources that we know or sources that we know aren't reliable, we got to check that too. And it's not balanced. We have to check that too, right? So I think on my personal Facebook page, I gave a homework assignment. I had people listen to Trevor Noah's recent discussion about this topic. And if you have Comedy Central, I would encourage everyone to listen to it. And I gave a host of questions on my Facebook page for people to process through with their families, knowing that the vast majority of people who posted on my other post saying, I'm with you, what can I do to help? None of them were going to do the homework required to be better and to be more thoughtful. Like, everyone will jump in private text and say, I feel you, man. You're in my thoughts. This is a horrible time for Black people. My response is always, no, this is a horrible time for America. This is our history. You should feel just as uncomfortable with the death of George Floyd. You should feel just as uncomfortable with the situation in Central Park, where the woman weaponized her whiteness to try to get a Black guy arrested for doing and being lawful. You should have been equally as upset when Tamir Rice was killed. Like, so it goes on and on and on. Like, this is not a black and white issue. I mean, it becomes that because we sit in our silos, we sit in our own context, and we never have the tough conversations in moments of discomfort. We run. I'm really imploring that we have these moments of discomfort in these conversations. And I'll tell you why it's even more important. Because if people think this is done, wait until school reopens in September. It's an election year. From September to November, we will be inundated with images of what happened this weekend over and over and over and over again. It will be politicized. Teachers will be asked very tough questions. Kids will have very harsh conversations. There will be misstatements and statements made. So to what extent are schools prepared to open in September to have these uncomfortable conversations that will push our education system forward? The other day yesterday I was sitting in my house and I was journaling. That's what I do when I get upset. I either journal, I cook, as you know, I take photography, I listen to music. And I said, this reminds me of sitting in my high school history classroom, watching images of the 1960s, 70s, 67, 68 riots, and thinking, wow, like, that was messed up what happened back then. We're that now. 20 years from now, when kids are looking through their history books, they'll be talking about us and how we reacted and how we responded. I remember looking at those videos going, man, like, how could blacks and whites hate each other so much back in the 60s? We're going through that right now in America. So where we were, and we're the same age, in our junior, senior year in high school, learning about history and all the old stuff people did, it was just happened to be filmed in black and white then. We're now in color. It's been cataloged. This is an historic moment in our history that people talk about forever. However, we have an opportunity to change how kids talk about it 20 years from now. if we do the right thing by having the conversations in discomfort and to have real social change.
I want to go back to the three reactions that your children had. I thought that was interesting, and I want you to just do a little bit more of explaining each perspective in a little more detail. So, and the I think the other issue is my kid's 8, right? So my kid doesn't get information from anywhere, and I mean that sincerely. Like, I've actually been criticized personally for not being as aware of of the world as I should be. But the truth is, I don't watch the news very often. I don't. I am a better human being in my life, I feel, when I don't watch the news, because I get anxious really easy. And when I read headlines, and this has been true during coronavirus, right? So I basically haven't needed to, because it's been the same headline for the last 10 weeks, who's open, who's not, when are they coming open, or, distance learning, all that. And so I literally have basically not been on Twitter. I don't go on the news, and I focus on my kids, right? I focus on being a dad and having time home with my children and doing stuff with them. And so when my 8-year-old comes in, he doesn't even know from anything, right? All he knows, basically what happens, I say to my wife at the end of the day, did I miss anything today? Right? What I missed in the day? Was there anything important? And she was like, actually, yeah. And so how, like, if you have a kid that age, like what if Shaun was 8 or 7, what would you say would you say the same thing then as you would when he was 13?
Absolutely not. I think that so. I think there's a danger. I mean, there's danger in how we feed our youth, right? So you want to avoid your child growing up in ignorance and in like this world where everything's perfect. I don't have the I can't afford my son to grow up not understanding his race. I can't afford him growing up what it means to be black and a male in America. I can't afford that. I can't send him off to college and that's the first time he engages in something racial and not know how to respond. I don't have that privilege to do that. So I'm not saying I just don't. I mean that's just the way America's set up. He has to know at some point he will be judged for the color of his skin, because of his size, because of who he is, by someone. And how he responds can be a life or death situation. So at 8 years old, yeah, I would have had that conversation with my son. At eight
So
years
what does
old,
it sound like? What is
oh,
exactly, what
well,
is
to me,
take?
it would have been us talking about here's what happened. Look at this image. I mean, I want you, not maybe not the video, but maybe the still shots of here's this officer with his knee on this guy's neck for over 9 minutes. Arguably, Shawnee, I'm talking to my son now.
Yeah.
The man passed away. He died. And it was very tough. And so right now, America is trying to figure out how to deal with police brutality. And he might ask, well, what is police brutality? Well, it's when very bad cops do things to hurt people when they're in handcuffs or when they're trying to make an arrest. And then he might then say, well, why would someone do that?
Yep. I want to,
Talk about
I would have loved to
yeah,
have been the eight year
yeah,
old.
yeah. You talk about you just sometimes people get trained. How daddy has to go get professional development to be a better educator. Officers have to do the same thing, and sometimes they get really bad training, or they don't have to improve their practice all the time. You could talk about, some police forces, they don't have a lot of black people on the force or other people of different races, and so they don't get different perspectives. And I mean, you could go down a rabbit hole with that whole situation. But I think it's where your kids go with it. At 8 years old, my son would have already known some of the injustice because it's been in part of his whole life growing up. We've talked about racial harmony. We're also being honest and saying there hasn't always been that. It's funny. My kids, every time we go on a trip, family trip, we drive from here to Myrtle Beach. We stop in D.C. or we stop at Gettysburg. I was a history teacher, and so they always say there's no family trips without a historical moment, is it, Dad? No, there's not, because this is going to predict our future. And so since they were young, we would travel and do things that weren't just to go sit on the beach at the end of the trip. But what can kids learn about our history between home and our final destination? We've done that since they were babies. And I think it has really helped shape their perspective. The other thing that avoids is that the kids grow up thinking just how I think. Like, I don't want them to just think how I am. So if I don't expose them to other information, I don't allow them to venture off, then I'm just creating a replica of myself. And I'm telling you, I know that I'm flawed. I know that I have been taught to fear certain things. I don't want my kids to grow up fearing. I think when you have fear in your head, it doesn't allow you, to use a basketball term, to play the game freely. right? You are constantly second guessing yourself. You second guess your own abilities. You second guess your place at the table. You second guess your own credentials. I don't want my kids to feel that. I want them to be conscious and aware of who they are and what society is, but I don't want them to be so afraid of life that they can't enjoy it. And I can tell you that that's how we grew up. In my generation, we grew up understanding how fear could end your life. I don't think that was a healthy introduction into my adolescence. But you remember, we're coming right off of the 60s and 70s riots. And so our parents were doing what they could do to protect us from some of the violence they may have faced, in as adults. So I think those type of conversations are really healthy. For my daughter, who's 17, she's going off to college next year. She's a junior in high school, and she is so optimistic about everything. I've never heard my daughter swear. I mean, never. And I joke with her, I'm like, just say one swear word. I'm not swearing. That's bad. She is the salt of the earth. And I am so afraid for her going to college. I'm so afraid of her having her first sip of alcohol. I'm so afraid of her meeting the first guy who expresses his liking to her, and how she'll respond to that, and fall in love with someone who's not good. I'm so afraid of her being called the N-word and not knowing exactly what that means. I'm so afraid of someone swearing at her out of rage and her not truly understanding that it's their issue and not hers. Like I am more afraid of my middle daughter than I am any of my kids, because she has lived her life so free of discrimination and racism, and she's chosen it. And I'm so happy for her. She has lived a life just like her white peers of privilege. And
What do
she's
you
gonna
mean by that? What do you mean by she's chosen that? Like, be specific. I don't
well,
understand
she,
anything.
she, she attends a school that is predominantly white. She has a mixed group of kids across the spectrum. But she hasn't had to deal with the stuff that the average kid in a racially mixed school environment has faced, or predominantly minority schools environment has faced. She's been able to be a kid, go to school, play sports, good grades, be happy, come home and the meals being cooked. Like, that's what it should be. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I just wonder if I've prepared her for a world that she's going to enter that she's not aware of. So it's not about her, it's about me. That as a parent, have I prepared her enough? And I just don't know. And I'm fearful that I haven't. And I have to trust that she will be. But undoubtedly, there's going to be a moment where she's going to call and say, Dad, I can't believe this happened. And I don't know how to react.
Hmm.
And I hope that she'll react the right way. My oldest, she's completely different. She's finished high school. She's gone through college. She's seen things. She's read things. She's a social work. Her major in social work, so she understands human dynamics, human development. So she has a whole different perspective of it at this point. She has a more academic perspective and a lived experience perspective. So but I'm not worried about her. But it's for my two youngest, because they're growing up in a world seeing it completely different. And I don't know what that was about our parenting. I know my son is at my hip everywhere I go. At the barbershop, so he hears things. In the car, he hears things. And so maybe he just picked it up because of just being around me. But yeah, man, as a parent, I think we have to treat each of our kids differently. I think as a parent, we have to filter what they get exposure to. But I don't think we should hide the truth. And for your son, it may be that his truth is that he's grown up in a world that no matter what, if he does his best in school. And the best doesn't mean straight A's. That on the back end of this, he'll be okay financially. He'll be okay socially. He's going to be in an environment that'll take care of him. I mean, Brian, you know a ton of people. If he finished high school and didn't go to college, you can get him a job in most places in the community. Just because of who you are, your reputation, just because he comes from a good home, just because he's a great kid, I mean, he's going to always be taken care of. And for a lot of kids in this country, that's not the case. Just simply because of the environment they were born into. It's not
Yeah.
because of merit. It's not because of merit. It's because of the situation they're born into. And that's also a frustration point for many blacks. No matter how hard you work, no matter how hard you try, there's just obstacles that you have to overcome that others don't.
What are some of those for you that you faced? I mean, you're at the top of the game, right? You're Dr. Nelms. You took over a school that was failing and turned it. I'm not going to say you did it alone, but with a
Right.
team of people, really turned it around. And so, what have those obstacles been for you in your life?
And this is going to sound very generic, I think, but I think it's the moment that I became very conscious. So James Baldwin said, he said something like, to be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in rage almost all the time.
Hmm.
So to be relatively conscious is to be in a rage almost all the time. So when you become conscious about things around you, you start to see systemic racism, you start to see social injustice, you start to see how some of your peers who weren't that bright are getting advances when you're not, and you start to see how the system is created. It creates this rage in you, not physical rage, an emotional, intellectual rage that it consumes you. Like I woke up yesterday and I swear I was having a panic attack.
Hmm.
Like I went to Wegmans, our local grocery store, and I'm walking in, I'm thinking, this is after the looting and after the peaceful protest, right? I'm thinking, am I going to be judged in this moment from the peaceful protest perspective or
Hmm.
from the images they saw of the looting within the community? So you walk into Wegmans, and so now you overly smile to people. You greet and you shake your head and you're not, to make them feel comfortable,
Hmm.
to know that you're not a threat. You weren't one of the looters. It's nothing that no one says you had to do, but it's something that you just inherently know. For me to feel safe in this space, more importantly, for me to make other people feel safe in this space, I have to like break down the barriers up front. And that doesn't, I know because I talk to my friends about this all the time, my white friends. That's not something they think about. It's not something that
Nope.
consumes them. It's not something that bothers them. They live their life to the best way possible based on their merit, based on their actions, based on their drive. They're not judged. My Italian friends aren't judged by other Italians and their actions in the community during that time. If there's a police shoot, if there's a fight on TV and it's two Italian guys, my Italian friends don't look at that and say, "Oh man, that's really messed up for our people." If it's two black people, I'm sitting there going, "Man, let's come on, guys, get it together," right? So there is an onus for owning everything that happens within black culture when you walk into a room. So you got to go through all those filters
Yeah.
before you even get to a
Yeah.
space where you can identify who you truly are as yourself. And that's something that's so hard to explain. And that people will dismiss it, oh, that's just calling a race card. We're not, listen, this race card game is not a game we created. I don't want to play in it. I'll fold my hand and put it like,
Right.
I don't want to play that game. Nobody is playing the game. This is the institutional racism and the structures and barriers that exist is the game. We're constantly moving through this maze trying to figure out how can I be judged for my merit? How can I walk in a space and feel welcomed and free? Like that's what we want to get to.
Yeah.
If there was a straight line to it, we would do it. The straight line is privilege. We don't have that. And again, this is not demonizing all white people. Let me be clear. This is not demonizing white people. This is demonizing a system that has allowed white people to advance and to be productive in ways that we have never been able to advance ourselves or to be productive. And that's what we're most frustrated about. And that's what most Americans should be frustrated about, even those who have benefited from it.
One of the things that I think a lot of people think and are not willing to say out loud, but I want to ask you about it is what is your response to the looting? Because somebody like me, I'm just going to talk about myself, right? I saw what happened to George Floyd and I was as disturbed as it gets. I've never been as disturbed watching an image in my life. Rodney King, right? Rodney King, when you're watching a guy get beat in broad daylight and nobody steps in to help, that was right. And in my lifetime, those are the two that I'll never forget.
Right.
But then the looting starts, right? And then you get people saying, but like, why are you doing that? Like, what benefit does that cause? Or how does that help the situation in any way? And I look at it from the images and I'm like, I often in the lineups, you see a lot of African American police officers who are standing there
Yeah.
saying stop, and so how does that piece of it fit into the puzzle?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say that looting is never appropriate. I think destroying things in your own community is never appropriate. Um, you mentioned, George Floyd, and you mentioned Rodney King as being the two pivotal moments. I can tell
In
you
my
that
lifetime
in
that
your
I
life,
could that I remember seeing visual images.
I would say for many blacks, it's the images that happened before Rodney King and the images that happened between Rodney King and George Floyd that are most memorable to them. Right? It's the constant police shooting, brutality, and the lack of conviction, like legal conviction of these cops who killed individuals for very small infractions, writing a bad check,
Yep.
selling cigarettes. Like these aren't things that go away in our mind. It's not the big events. It's not the triggers, right? Those are the triggers. Rodney King and George Floyd were the triggers. All the other things
Yeah.
are the issues that we remember because those things happened in our communities. Those are things that we see happening all the time in our communities. Like it's not like I think sometimes white people think that these police brutality things are one-off situations. It happens in the communities all the time. I mean, you think about college, listen to Public Enemy, Can't Trust Us. It was in that video. You think about Ice-T's video. It was in that. You think about old songs, blues. I mean, it has been a historical situation. So I don't condone looting at all. But I'll tell you, there are many people who feel like, you know what? We've tried to kneel. People said kneeling was a bad thing. It was anti-patriotic. We speak up at athletes speak up at the podium. Shut up and just dribble, right? LeBron James. People speak at the Grammys. People say, oh, you're making the Grammys or the Oscars too political. Like so what are we supposed to do? Keep taking it? So you can't kneel, you can't have silent protests, and so I think some people are just so frustrated,
Yeah.
and it's a politics. Now some people are blatant opportunists. They saw that as an opportunity to go rob and steal and to damage and do all those things. I rolled the city of Rochester yesterday. I helped clean. I was part of the cleanup effort yesterday. First of all, the looting was in isolated areas. It wasn't all over Rochester. And by the time from between 10 and 11 a.m., the vast majority of businesses that were damaged were already boarded up and cleaned up by community volunteers. Just to put in perspective. So the community came out and did the work to repair its own community. So if we allow the looting to replace the positive protests and the issues that led to it, then that's problematic. In the same sense, if we allow these 4 police officers who killed this individual, George Floyd, to represent all police officers, then we've missed the big point also.
Mm.
So I would say the looting was horrible. It was scary. I was worried about the young kids out there being hurt in the process. I was worried about the adults being bad examples, all that. Um, but but the looting is not going to replace watching an officer put his knee on the neck of someone for 9 minutes, and arguably the last 2 minutes he was already dead. It's not going to replace the fact that this grown man was crying for his mother, who had already died 2 years to the day of his death. It's not going to replace the fact that those officers hit him and beat him in the back of the police car before dragging him out and killing him. That's not going to be lost on me. What people yelling at the officers to stop, you're going to kill this man. He's no longer a threat. He's in handcuffs. It's not going to be lost on me. So if somebody wants to conveniently use the looting to paint the entire picture of the racial issues in our system, paint the picture of the injustice, then that's a convenient excuse. Go ahead and do it.
Sure.
But by doing that, you're perpetuating the same thing that's happened for centuries, where people don't want to address the issues in moments of discomfort. I refuse to do that. I'm not going to condone the looting. It's bad. It's horrible. But you know what? For those people who destroyed those buildings and those people who are opportunists, they'll have their day in court and they will be judged and let the police take care of that.
Yeah.
And they'll do a great job at it. But that wasn't my concern. When I looked at that, I didn't look at looting. I looked at people who were hurt. I looked at
Hurt. One of my favorite lines that Dr. Jodin Carrington says is hurt people hurt people.
yeah,
And and I think that's true in school. I think that's true in life. And I think when people feel like they're attacked and their back is up against the wall, they're often, their instinct is to lash out. And my issue with it is that I think it takes the focus off where the focus needs to be. And I don't want, like, for me, I don't want the focus to be on that, right? I want the focus to be on the officers and what happened to them. And so I actually worry as a white person that it's going to take the focus off of where the focus should be. And I want to be clear, like, the looters were of all colors, right, that I saw. I mean, this wasn't a black thing that was looting. I saw all sorts of different colors being
right,
you say the word opportunist, right?
right.
Taking it. At least I think that
Absolutely was. No, it absolutely was. And I mean, I
yeah,
think you see that there was reports of anarchists there. You look at the people who were destroying the police cars in Rochester; they were all white. So you didn't see blacks in those cars doing that. It was these guys doing this. They lit the fire and then it spread. Again, I think it goes back to that statement, that quote by Baldwin about being relatively conscious. I don't think those looters were conscious. Like I don't think that they did the homework that you're doing now to better understand how to combat injustice. I think they have their lived experiences that say no matter what I do, I'm going to continue to be a target by bad cops. Not all cops, by bad cops. I'm going to continue to be then placed in a system that does not give me a balanced perspective in my sentencing or my probation. We know that, right? So I think that again, I think in the spirit of becoming relatively conscious in what you're doing right now, what I'm trying to do, what we're trying to teach our kids, hopefully those folks who did the loitering and the looting will somehow become more conscious in their decisions moving forward and then think a more peaceful way. I'll tell you, the solution is November, we have an election.
Yeah.
So how many people out there looting, how many people out there protesting are actually signed up to vote? And this is not saying who you should vote for, but this is going to be an important election. It will tell us what we want to be in the next 4 years. Do you maintain status quo or do you try something different? Do you? I guess. Listen, I'm not gonna try not to share my political affiliation because this is not the space for that, or my political desires or needs, or because that's not the space. But I will say this: there's enough evidence to suggest that if we continue in the direction we're going for the next 4 years, it won't get better. Now,
Yeah.
that means that the current president could change his perspective and create new policies and to stop tweeting racist things and perhaps even him as president, he can get better. I don't know. Again, I know you have people from on
Yeah.
your podcast from all different walks of life, so I
Yeah.
don't want to go there. Or do you find someone who may be, I don't care political party, in the same political party who has a more progressive mindset around change and social justice. I don't know what the solutions are, but I know we cannot continue to do the same thing for the next 4 years in the manner which we've done the last 4 years and expect this world to be better.
Do you think it's important for kids to so I see this again sometimes on comments on social media, right? You shouldn't talk about skin color. You should talk about skin color. You shouldn't, you should identify by other things. Is it important to stay away from that with kids? And also, do you think it matters? Like I grew up, right? I went to Rush Henrietta. So we were a very culturally diverse place, right? I mean, it was, I think 30 to 35% of the student body was African American. We had Asian, we had everything there. And,
Yeah.
and so I feel like I grew up like playing basketball and playing baseball and playing sports with people of all colors and all races. And I look at my own kids and it's not as much for them. I don't feel. Do you think it's important? Does that matter? When
Yeah,
kids are
yeah,
young?
absolutely. So I think two things. I think like to ignore or to avoid the conversation about me being a black male is ridiculous. Like I'm a black male. Your kids can look at me and know I'm black. Like so to have him say he's not really black, like pretend he's not black, it's ridiculous. It's now I'll tell you what is dangerous. It's what is associated with your child's understanding of blackness. That's the problem. All right. So if they look at a white friend of yours, or Jeff, for example, the one you did the podcast for, they look at Jeff, they see him as a tall white guy. You say, that's my white friend Jeff. If their association isn't the same as you saying, this is my black friend Shaun, first of all, you say my friend, you shouldn't say white or black. But I'm saying if the white and black came up, I wouldn't identify and say, this is my black friend Shaun, this is my friend
Yeah,
Shaun.
I got you.
You're
I
right.
got you.
But I'm saying, let's just say in a really bad situation, you said, this is my white friend Jeff and my black friend Shaun, right? If your kid associates whiteness different from blackness, that's a problem. If they associate
Mm.
him having a greater benefit to you because he's white than I do because I'm black, then that's a problem. If they look at us and say, Jeff's a really cool guy, and based on his merits, what he's done for me, I'm going to treat him this way. And Shaun's a really super cool guy, and based on how he's treated me, I'm going to treat him this way. That's different. What happens in America is that we associate color or religion with an ideology, and then we project that ideology on our interactions with those in the future. And that's a problem. We have to really be careful that when we associate ourselves with preconceived notions about a person because of who they are, color, size, religion, sexuality, that's when it becomes problematic. Being black is not the problem. You judging me based on my blackness or your racialized perspective of me is the problem.
Mm.
And I think that's more of a concern. I think it was the book Dream Keepers talks about the racialized perspective. That means the way you view me is how I respond. So if Brian, you approach me as a black person out of fear because you think I'm going to harm you, sometimes I will cower myself because I can feel and sense that you are fearful of me. If you come at me aggressive because you're scared of me, then I'm going to defend myself. I'm going to have this physical response because your racial perspective of me is one that I'm a fearful and a tough individual. But if you come to me out of love, you come to me in the same way you would come to another friend of yours who you've known, then I respond back that same way. It's a different mindset. It puts the racialized perspective on the person who's coming and greeting you instead of you responding to them. So how you approach me is how it will help determine how I respond. And we see it all the time. You walk by someone and you smile, they smile back because you're projecting to them a sense of peace. We do it every day. But when we come to racial situations, how we grew up and what we think often dictates how we interact with that individual.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when people start clutching their purse.
Mm-hmm.
That's when they move over to the side in the elevator.
Mm-hmm.
That's when they make the black joke in the conference room, right? Because they're trying to make you feel comfortable. I don't need that type of comfort from you. I don't need that type of validation from you. I don't want to see that or feel that. Approach me based on my merits, not based on your preconceived notions or past experiences, because I'm not doing that to you. If I judge every white person based on the worst white person I met, this would be a lonely place.
Right. No doubt. Last question I have for you, and then I'll let you wrap up with anything that you want to leave people with. Are you offended by people who don't speak up? So that's another thing on social media that I've seen is people get attacked, and me included, of if you don't use your quote unquote platform, right, to speak up. And I think that's unfair, truthfully. I don't speak up on Twitter, and that's because I think Twitter is limiting. I think Twitter gives you a certain number of characters, and I think when you have a limited amount of space, your thoughts and ideas can be taken out of context and they can be twisted. I prefer this, right? I prefer where I can go, no time limit, have a discussion, talk about issues. Do you think is it offensive for people that don't actually use the platform to speak up?
I don't think it's offensive, but I think it's a cop out not to, and I think you're doing it now. So I would say you are doing it.
Oh, I'm doing it. I'm just not doing it on Twitter. I don't do it
Yeah.
on
No,
Twitter. I
no.
do it everywhere else. I have an issue with Twitter.
What I'm saying is it's no one can dictate how you choose to express yourself. What I would much I don't care about social media being the space to express it. I put a lot of stuff out there because people read it, and I try to put balanced stuff out there because people actually pay attention to it. I'm much more concerned about the conversations that happens in the comfort of someone's home. Like I would say there's a greater benefit to have you speak out in moments when you are alone with people who may view themselves like-minded. So I'll ask you a question, and if
Yeah.
it's putting you on the spot, I apologize, but I think it's important. So you are an individual who has grown up in a diverse environment. Your high school, which actually your high school represents the fabric of America. We look at the racial and demographic and religious components. I used to be a principal there, so I'm telling you, it is a fabric of America. And then you went to a predominantly white institution, historically white institution, State College of Fredonia, where you and I met. And then you went into a world where you are educating and supporting educators across the country, right?
Yep.
How many times in your lifetime have you heard something that's racist? And I'll stay there. We can go to sexism and all that. How many times have you heard something racist and you walked away feeling so uncomfortable, but knew you didn't say anything in the moment?
It's
It's in
happened.
those it's in those moments we're asking
Yeah.
people to speak up.
Hmm.
It's in those moments, and a lot of times those things happen at family cookouts and barbecues. And this is reported by our white friends, my white friends that yeah, sometimes I'm in my family's house
Yeah.
and my uncle always says something. It bothers me. And I say, what'd you say about it? Because your children are watching you not say something. So that's also your children are learning from you in those moments too.
Yeah.
When you're being silent, when you're saying that when you're at home saying we believe in racial harmony, and then you go to Uncle Joe's house, Uncle Joe uses the N word repeatedly or talks about those black people, and you say nothing.
Right.
What is that saying to your children or
Right.
to your child? Like who is dad and mom really in those moments?
Right. Right.
So, like, to what extent are you willing to give up something in the spirit of racial harmony, in the spirit of racial justice? Like, what are you willing to sacrifice? If some, a friend of mine, Bettina Love, amazing, amazing educator and professor, says we don't need allies, we need co-conspirators.
Mm,
I mean, people are willing to give up as much as we're willing to give up to seek equity.
mm,
So, in those moments, in your private spaces, when your kids are watching, when you're at a bar and someone does something stupid, when you're in a restaurant and someone makes a bad comment, those moments are the moments you should speak up.
and I feel the same. And I feel like sometimes it's like almost trying to do it in a social media platform. It's like you're trying to do it just to do it, to appease. And I agree. It's not genuine. It's not authentic. And I think I agree with you 100%. I think that's the way to go. These times go quick. Is there anything that I appreciate you, man? It was fantastic. I learned so much. I can't wait to listen to this one back. I often learned so much more when I listen the second and third time to an interview. Is there anything that you would like to leave people with? I always ask people that as we go.
I would just say George Floyd, like, don't forget his name. Don't forget what he lived. Don't forget what he stood for. And don't allow the narrative to be changed to reflect something other than justice.
Thank you very much, man. I appreciate it.
All right, be well, man. Take care.